Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
I think there are a few things that should be cleared up today. First of all, we are not a democracy. We are a republic. I think it's extremely important to remember that and to understand our form of government. I also think that this is one of the reasons why people dislike politicians. We all know what's happening here. We know that Alvin Bragg's prosecution of President Trump is Exhibit A of the left's by any means necessary lawfare campaign against President Trump. Alvin Bragg's prosecution of President Trump opened a dangerous Pandora's box of politically motivated prosecutions of political opponents, and Manhattan District Judge Juan Merchan's decisions, guided by political bias, unfairly prejudiced the outcome of the trial and violated President Trump's due process rights. Anyone with a lick of sense knows that those statements are actually cannot be refuted. We all watched what happened during the course of the trial. Professor Smith, have you ever been retained as an expert to testify on campaign finance matters prior to the case against President Trump?
Yes.
Okay, and briefly, what were the nature of those cases? What issues or federal laws did you testify with regard to?
All of those were other cases in which I was asked to testify about past experience with federal campaign finance laws, customs in campaigns, how they pay for things. There were maybe as many as 4. I don't like to do expert witness work, and I don't normally do it. And in none of those that you mentioned testifying, in none of those did I end up testifying, either because the case is settled, because one is still pending, or because in one other case the judge decided that this would be testimony that would go to the law.
Can you briefly describe your qualifications to provide such expert testimony?
Well, as has been mentioned, I served as a commissioner on the Federal Election Commission, including a term as chairman. I've written one book specifically on campaign finance and served as co-author on 2 others on campaign finance and election law. I have been, at one point, cited as one of the most cited scholars in the field of election law. A recent book from the University of Chicago Press suggested that I've had more influence on campaign finance than any other scholar in the last 40 or 50 years or something like that. So I've kind of devoted my life to this. This is what I do.
You're qualified to testify about federal campaign finance law,
This is what I do,
Smith.
yeah.
Would you also agree that campaign finance law is a complex area and one where a lot of Americans who may have to sit on a jury would benefit from expert witness testimony to understand the alleged crimes that they are being asked to decide?
Extremely so. At one point, Justice Scalia, when he was serving on the Supreme Court, actually said during the middle of oral argument, he says, "This law is so complex, I can't figure it out."
So, Professor Smith, to the best of your knowledge, is Michael Cohen a campaign finance law expert?
Not to my knowledge, and not what I've seen.
Well, yet Judge Merchan allowed him to testify as such during the course of the Trump trial, didn't he?
Yes, in theory for other purposes, but nonetheless you had him repeatedly saying, this violated the law, that violated.
So Judge Merchan commented when ruling to limit the scope of any testimony that you would provide that, quote, "There is no question that this would result in a battle of the experts, which will only serve to confuse and not assist the jury," end quote. From the standpoint of someone who practiced as a trial attorney for 34 years, I find that to be an extremely bizarre statement, because that, in fact, is the situation anytime you have a case where expert testimony is needed. In fact, I worked on a case called Nebraska versus Wyoming at one point, and Wyoming had over 25 expert witnesses in everything from hydrology to ag engineering to economics to fluvial geomorphology to all of these things, and Nebraska had something similar. Yet the judge, including the United States Supreme Court, was not excluding expert witnesses simply because there was going to be a battle of the experts. Is that your experience as well?
That is, and I would point out one thing I mentioned earlier, that there are a number of things I would have testified to that would not have gone to legal conclusions, but rather testifying about customs practices, about simply reporting dates under the law, and it appeared from the judge's rulings that even that kind of testimony would not have been allowed.
He wasn't going to allow you to testify to those things, but he allowed Mr. Cohen to sit up there and say President Trump violated federal election laws, didn't he?
Yes.
Professor Smith, going on, do you believe that the court committed reversible error by allowing Mr. Cohen to testify about alleged election violations?
I think it was erroneous, and I'm not even sure what the standard, not being a criminal law guy, what the standard of review is for that kind of error. And sometimes if it's abuse of discretion, courts give trial judges a lot of leeway. But it doesn't mean the decision wasn't right, wasn't wrong.
Judge Wilson, do you believe that Judge Mershon committed reversible error in excluding Mr. Smith but allowing Mr. Cohen to testify on these issues?
In and of itself, that may not be enough to secure a reversal of the conviction, but there is a concept in appellate law, a cumulative error. And what I believe we've seen in the Trump trial is a series of errors, one piled upon the other, cumulative errors that when you put them all together show that Donald Trump did not have a fair trial and that his conviction should be reversed.
I'm absolutely convinced that his conviction will be reversed. And I also believe that Judge Mershon was well aware of that when he made the decisions during the course of trial that he did. I found his decisions to be egregious reversible error on so many different levels. Thank you all for being here today, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from South
Mr.
Carolina.
Chair, before that-
Gentlelady, the ranking member is recognized.
I just, for